Good afternoon. My name is Doug Mackey. It's a pleasure to be here with our panelists today. I'm working with one of our panelists, Ms. Cynthia Hughes, on the Weaponization Watch project by the Patriot Freedom Project. And we also have here, of course, Colonel Rob Maness and Garrett Ziegler as well. Thank you all for being here. We are going to be talking about a office of the DOJ called the EDNY, the Eastern District of New York, is a district that comprises Brooklyn, Long Island, Staten Island, and Today we're talking about the EDNY, which has a long and illustrious history about that today. So for those that don't know, in 2016, I posted a funny meme in Manhattan, notably not in the EDNY, saying that Hillary Clinton supporters could text their vote and avoid the line and stay home. Now, this was obviously a joke, but not to the EDNY. 4 years later and 7 days after Biden was inaugurated, the FBI came knocking at my door, the New York FBI, and I found out that I was being indicted in the EDNY for conspiracy against rights, a federal felony punishable by up to 10 years in federal prison, a $250,000 fine, because they said that I had conspired in DM group chats to trick people or steal their votes. So this case was brought in the EDNY, even though not a single defendant lived in the EDNY. Not a single defendant was in the EDNY when the supposed conspiracy happened. They said that, number one, that because I sent the tweet out and then I could conceive that it could be seen in the EDNY, well, under that theory of prosecution, I could be prosecuted in Alaska or Wyoming or Hawaii, anywhere in the country. Secondly, they said, well, the tweet went on the wires that go either under the water or over the bridge surrounding Manhattan, which those waters share jurisdiction with the EDNY. Ultimately, we fought venue in the case, but the question was never decided because I won the appeal, and the appellate court ruled that the EDNY didn't even bring evidence in my case to show that I ever was part of any conspiracy to steal anyone's vote. Not to mention there were no victims in the case. They couldn't find a single person who actually believed the meme, and they didn't have any evidence that the cooperating witness, the co-conspirator in the case, and I had ever coordinated on any of these memes or anything like that. So what does this go to show you? It goes to show you how the EDNY brings charges based on tenuous or non-existent evidence, using novel prosecutorial theories. In my case, using a statute that is supposed to be used against people who conspire to injure, threaten, oppress, or intimidate Americans in the exercise of their rights. For instance, masked men chasing people down for voting and assaulting them, or worse, killing them. The statute actually contains a death penalty provision for if your conspiracy results in death. Fortunately, my meme didn't result in anyone dying, so I didn't face the death penalty. But this goes to show why are they targeting me? And we're going to hear about a whole litany of other cases. Well, this is a politicized office. It's a rogue office. They're not only doing the political bidding of the Democrat Party, but also they like flashy prosecutions that make their careers. They don't want to chase your common bad guy like an illegal immigrant selling drugs or whatever on the streets. They want to go after certain industries like finance, crypto, which we've seen time and time again, and they want to go after people like me who are political opponents of Donald Trump. They also went after Donald Trump's great friend Tom Barrack and claimed that he was acting as a FARA, he was violating FARA, the Foreign Agents Registration Act, because he was doing basically normal business activities or normal diplomatic outreach. But once Trump left office, they indicted Tom Barrack. He fought the case and won at trial, was outright acquitted. And he was the chief of Trump's inauguration, I believe, his first inauguration. So with that being said, I want to turn it over to the panel and to first to Colonel Rob to talk about some of the history of the EDNY here and some of the illustrious actors who have come out of the EDNY.
Thanks, Doug. I appreciate that. You know, this coverage of this district in New York and the history behind it is critically, you know, and guess where, if you had to find the root cause or the deep well of political partisan prosecutors and corruption, where would you go? The Eastern District of New York. And I'm proud to be part of this Weaponization Watch effort with Cynthia because a lot of the folks that we are trying to help and advocate for and get visibility on are being prosecuted by this very district in New York. Let me tell you about some of the people that have come out of this and what they've done to this country. Andrew Weissman. You remember that name, right? From the Mueller witch hunt, the Russian witch hunt against President Trump and his supporters, where they broke every rule and norm and ethics regulation by doing things like destroying all of their cell phones on that prosecution team. Once it found out that and the report came out that there was no there, and they spent $20-something million doing it. It was a complete hoax. Andrew Weissman, don't ever forget that. He was the head of the criminal division in the Eastern District of New York. Jack Smith, currently in the news still, the rogue special prosecutor that went after President Trump and all of his supporters over the insurrection, the fake insurrection that was crafted completely by those inside the government and in the political hierarchy, in the party hierarchy of those in power. Jack Smith, and he's still at it today. Well, believe it or not, Jack was the head of public integrity in the Eastern District of New York. It's hard to say that without laughing. Because he's so ridiculous that he's been overturned by the Supreme Court by a vote of 9-0 before, because not even the leftists on the Supreme Court to support this creep that has zero integrity and will do whatever he can to politically hurt those in opposition to whoever he's working for. In this case, it was President Joe Biden. Everybody knows the name of Loretta Lynch in the famous discussion on the ramp with former President Bill Clinton.
About the grandchildren.
About the grandchildren,
that's
right?
What they told us. Talk about grandchildren.
Loretta Lynch came out of the Eastern District of New York as the U.S. Attorney to the Attorney General there. So if you want to go find the deep well of corruption and partisan political prosecutions and where they're created at, you probably ought to look at the EDNY first. But remember, the bottom line is this: these people have caused grave damage to the government of the United States, and most importantly, to the sovereigns, the citizens of the United States, because we can no longer count on equal justice before the law until the situation with people like this is rectified and they are held accountable to the maximum extent of the law.
Thank you, Colonel. And I want to add about Loretta Lynch. After Loretta Lynch left the EDNY, there was a prosecutor in Suffolk County, the district attorney's office, named Christopher McPartland, and he blew the whistle about this plane meeting, right? And the EDNY went after this guy after Loretta Lynch went to the U.S. Attorney's Office and made his life a complete living hell. They charged him with obstruction of justice, and then they unleashed a whole barrage of media leaks to the New York Times, the New York Post, etc. And he complained to the DOJ about these leaks and got nothing back from them. So it really makes you wonder what's going on in the EDNY and the sort of retaliation and the sort of bidding that they're doing of these actors. So thank you very much, Colonel. And I want to mention Cynthia is a warrior for a lot of defendants in the EDNY, myself included, but she also has a heart of gold, and she's really attuned to the personal stories and, importantly, the families and the effect that these cases have on families. And I could talk about that a lot, and my poor wife and son who had to go through it all. But I want to turn the floor over to Cynthia to discuss about the impact these weaponized prosecutions are having on people's lives and, importantly, their families.
Thank you, Doug. Colonel, that was amazing. Thank you. And I want to tell you, we don't call that an insurrection. We actually call it a Fedsurrection, because that's what it was, right? Darren, on
Yeah, I mean,
January
it was
6th?
an insurrection. Nobody brought a gun. Who would have thought? It's a novel theory
Yeah.
of the law.
Yeah. So, Doug, as you know, with January 6th, I became, a big advocate, and we focused, mainly on the family core, taking care of the wives and the children, trying to keep as much normalcy for these families as we possibly could. And it became just this monumental, organization and, collective effort with, a group of really great women that were caught up in the January 6th debacle. And so we've spent the last 4 years helping these families, just keeping them connected to one another and, helping them with their bills, their mortgage, their electric, making sure Christmas was happening, making sure Halloween was happening, making sure brand new shoes for back to school was happening. But 5 years later, where are we, right? Where are we now? So what we learned is that before January 6th, we learned that, we had the warm-up, right? We had the warm-up, what happened in Michigan, Garrett.
Yeah.
And we call
Kidnapping.
That's right. We call that a Fednapping.
Yeah.
Okay. And so we had, the warm up in Michigan with the Fednapping. Gretchen Whitmer, she requires attention, and so she really, went out there and created some serious attention for herself. She's a liar, is what she is. But in any event, and then we had January 6th. You have a lot of families that are still broken from the Whitmer Fednapping, men that are still languishing behind bars in a supermax prison with El Chapo. And then we have January 6th. And so now, what are we doing now, Doug, right? We have to, I don't say move on from January 6th, but we have to take what we've learned from the Whitmer Fednapping, from the January 6th Fedsurrection, and we have to apply it now because we're hearing from so many people around the country who are victims of weaponization. And it may not be from what happened in Michigan, it may not be what happened here in DC on January 6th, but it's because of whatever is going on. And so I don't want to talk about specific families that we're working with right now, that we're helping, who they are. Because they're in the thick of it, but I'll say this. The damage that I've seen with the Whitmer families, definitely with the January 6 families, I'm seeing it now with just families that weren't caught up in a politically motivated, episode, if you will. So we've created Weaponization Watch, and we're going to continue our humanitarian efforts because there's a big need for that. People need connection. People need to go to somebody who knows how they feel. Go to talk to somebody to say, well, you saw it today here, right? We connected all these different families with January 6 families, and you saw almost like this relief in some of the women that we saw here today, because they're just starting the journey. These other women have come through it. So we have to, we have to blow the lid off of weaponization, and you have to start somewhere. And I say we have to start with EDNY. What the EDNY is doing, there needs to be a special prosecutor appointed to the EDNY. I have somebody in mind who I would like to see doing that job, but he wears enough hats. But you know, his name is Ed Martin, and I think that Ed has such a spine and a backbone and compassion and love for the core family unit. You know that, Gary, firsthand. And so we need a bright light to shine on EDNY and SDNY, because we're learning, Doug, they are breaking up families. They are threatening people. They are looking to be, they're overzealous, and they're trying to have a big win, like a big payday. And they're doing it at the expense of, tax-paying Americans, okay? People maybe they support something in finance. People maybe support this president. People maybe they, supported, I don't know, America's mayor, Giuliani. Whatever the case, may be, the fact is we have to shine a light on what is going on in these very, very rogue jurisdictions and how it's impacting these families, how it's impacting children, Garrett, how it's impacting, a wife, men that are going away to prison for 10, 15, 20, 35 years, life in prison maybe. What happens to these little children? That is the biggest thing for me. Why do these jurisdictions like EDNY and SDNY have to have this big win? Why is it such a power trip for these people? Why do they want to take families and rip them apart when they don't have to do that? There needs to be somebody in EDNY right now, Garrett, Doug, Colonel, and somebody needs to shine a light over there, because it is, I thought January 6th was bad. No, I gotta tell you, January 6th was its own animal, its own monster, whatever. What I'm learning about EDNY, being with Doug's family, being with Doug's baby, seeing this baby, thinking about if Doug was in prison right now, where that baby would be right now, where his beautiful wife would be. No, we have to put an end to this, and we have to shine a light on this, and we have to talk more about this. And I'll just say this last thing. There's 2 women sitting in a Brooklyn prison right now. Doug, you and I know who they are, okay? They're languishing behind bars. They've been there for quite a long time now, okay? Because of a bogus conspiracy charge. That conspiracy charge is so dangerous. Conspiracy is like taking spaghetti, throwing it against the wall. Stand up and speak out like this. Nobody else is doing it. We hope President Trump sees this and hears this and does something.
These are vague charges, novel charges, unsubstantiated charges, and like you said, they introduce the conspiracy element, and they can shift their prosecutorial theory as
The trial.
new evidence comes in, or their evidence is discredited or disqualified. They're going to shift their theory to make it fit the vague charge. So I want to shift over to Garrett really quickly, because Garrett is good at looking at these kind of things with an analytical, strategic mind and practical steps. That what can you do with an organization, the federal government, with 2.2 million employees? How in the world are you ever going to get to the bottom of it without breaking the whole thing so that you can't get anything done? So Garrett, do you want to speak to this?
Yeah, so the rudimentary education is that 94 districts are in this federal system, right? So there's county courts in this country, municipal courts, but the federal court system is broke up into 94 pieces of pie. Now there's 93 U.S. attorneys. I think Guam and the Mariana Islands share a U.S. attorney. So the EDNY is one of those 94 cutouts. It just so happens that it's one of the most poisonous. And each of these 94 districts will have its own org chart, its own levers of authority, its own FBI agents that will do dirty deeds for them. I know that Douglas, this Megan Reese figure, has worked on multiple ridiculous cases. So these prosecutors become buddy-buddy with certain FBI agents who will submit complaints under oath that are false and get a magistrate judge to sign off on it. So the practical step is you have to have visibility into this entire operation. And the only way you do that is you have to be able to map out these offices and account for every single person with any amount of hard or soft power within the office. So this may sound boring or tedious to some, but you have to get a grip on how the office functions. Right now, if you held a gun to somebody's head and made them tell you everything they knew about the EDNY, they may know who the acting U.S. attorney is, some active cases, but they probably couldn't tell you and take you through how the sausage is made. We have to, on the right, and by right I simply mean this, people who value the Constitution as amended. That's what I define as the right. People who care about constitutional form of government. You have to become interested in how the sausage is made. We have to become sausage connoisseurs in a way. And that's a bad joke, but that's what you have to be. The sausage is made by filling out an org chart. The org chart should be electronic. And whoever comes in, whether it's Ed Martin or John Laura or whoever, they have to audit every single position. Every single position should be justified for its existence. If you don't do that, they are like termites. There are going to be some people in there that burrow themselves in that still have authority that you haven't nixed yet. And we owe it to the Republican form of government that the executive branch is actually that the elected leader is in charge of the executive branch. Because right now, the elected person, elected by 80 million Americans, at least probably, he doesn't control the entire executive branch. He may control portions of it. I have no doubt that he was aware of what was going on with Maduro, but he needs to be aware of how charging decisions are made in the EDNY because his citizens and voters are getting crushed. And like you said, they're overzealous. They have a desire to win at all costs. And if you're not an independent multimillionaire, or if you don't have people like Cynthia organizing these sorts of institutions, you will get crushed. And so I call on anybody who's interested in the details to bring this up, that we need to know every single, we pay their salary. We need to know every single Fed who's at the EDNY.
Right. Personnel is policy, like they say. And
Yes.
to illustrate your point, the prosecutor in charge of my case was the election crime specialist for 2020 and 2024. Do you think he was chasing after ballot stuffing?
And he's still there, I bet.
He's still there, and is he going to be the election crime specialist in 2028? So this is something we're going to look at. I've got, fortunately, some lawyers retained. We're going to look at this EDNY, this gentleman. And as you brought
What's
up,
his name?
Eric Paulson.
Paulson.
And there's only 10 of these prosecutors that are appointed, elections gurus or czars, whatever you want to call them, across the country. They're chasing down memes on the internet, apparently.
The meme was hilarious, for the record.
It was funny.
Some levity is absolutely hysterical.
Absolutely, and to everybody except for the prosecutors and the jury. And secondly, you mentioned Megan Reese. It's a strange one. She was hired in 2014. How did she go from the Washington field office to the New York field office, working on all these politicized cases, accused of being part of a team that was tampering with evidence, and now the rumor is she's moved to Boston. So it's a strange thing. We need to get to the heart of all this. So
Can I give you a contemporary example?
Yeah, really quickly.
We mapped out 145 federal officials who touched the Biden investigation. 145 of them. So this can be done. We used mind mapping tools like MindMeister. We have to get creative, and there are tools out there to where you don't have to keep this stuff in your head. You should, publicize these org charts. It lets the feds know that they're being watched.
Absolutely.
And
Go
Doug,
ahead.
I'm sorry, Doug. I know you want to kick us out, but it's the same thing with the Whitmer Fednapping. It's all the same players.
Yeah.
Colonel from Michigan that came to D.C. right before January 6th.
That's right.
DeAntono.
D'Antuono, whatever the heck his
He
name is.
finally left, right? What's
Yeah.
he doing? Microsoft, probably.
Maybe playing dominoes or something. I don't know. In any event, but it's like it's just repeat behavior.
Yeah.
The Democratic Party, I think we can all agree, is a dangerous, what I'm calling a terrorist organization.
I
at
would
this
call them
point.
satanic.
I'll give you that one.
A few of them are satanic.
That's a conversation for another day, Doug and Colonel. But
Absolutely.
they need the Democratic. This is not a Democratic Party anymore. It's just not, and we need eyes on not only the Democratic Party but EDMY. And SBMY, but EDMY is really, it's out of control.
Maybe we can have a web page on Weaponization Watch, just all of the sins and abuses of the EDNY, like
do it.
weaponizationnwatch.org/EDNY.
And if you want to support all of the conversations you're hearing today, you want to support these women that are languishing behind bars, these other families who are facing a very big crisis here soon, and January 6ers who are still in limbo, go to patriotfreedomproject.com or please go to weaponizationwatch.com and help us continue this fight.
My name is Lieutenant Commander Tom Caldwell, U.S. Navy retired, and I was a political prisoner in the United States of America. We're now at the anniversary of January 6th. My wife Sharon and I celebrated our first Christmas of freedom in 5 years. The world was told by the Biden administration that I was the commander of the Oath Keepers, and I was the mastermind of January 6th attack on the Capitol, that I led an armed force of men into that building. None of that was true, of course, and the DOJ and the FBI knew it was untrue, even as they issued those fantasies in press releases. They knew of my innocence even as the FBI SWAT team rolled up on our farm in Virginia, attacked our home and nearly murdered my wife on the front porch of our house as she stood there in full compliance to their orders to come out in nothing but a nightshirt in the pre-dawn hours of the 19th of January, 2021. I never went into the Capitol on January 6th. In fact, Sharon and I were together peacefully all day long that day. Never saw any violence, never committed any violence, never broke any laws. Again, the DOJ knew all of this, but they did not care. And so began an odyssey for my wife and me to include persecution, wrongful imprisonment, torture in prison, violation of our rights, a 10.5-week jury trial in a kangaroo court in Washington, D.C., and untold numbers of indignities as they tried to break us physically, and yes, I called that book The Mouths of the Wicked. It is a true January 6th story of corruption, persecution, survival, and victory. It's available now online at bookbaby.com and puffinpublishers.com. I wrote this book for a couple of reasons. One was so that there would be an historical record of the prosecutorial malfeasance thrown at me and so many others caught up in this web of January 6th deceit and chicanery. The other reason that I wrote this book and felt moved to do so was to glorify the living God. You see, when truth and innocence count for nothing, you better have another plan. For my wife Sharon and me, it wasn't a backup plan, it was the first plan. Prayer. Prayer to our Father. She and I battled for over 4 years, nearly 5 years day for day, against the corruption of the Biden administration, the lawfare brought by a bunch of corrupt prosecutors, questionable judiciary members, and a bunch of Keystone Cop wannabe law enforcement people out of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We fought for a long, long time. I hope that you do read the book. Book people call it a first-person adventure narrative told as one friend speaking to another. And I will tell you this, I bring in the receipts. Maybe it's part of that Navy training burning through. When I tell you about the things that they did in those secret tribunals, you better believe I have the government's own documentation to prove it. And it's there in those heartfelt written pages and the endnotes which follow. I hope that if you do read it, And it will take courage and commitment for you to get this book and read this book. I hope that you're engaged and enraged and maybe even encouraged. Because the kinds of things that happen to Sharon and I happen to hundreds and hundreds of our fellow citizens. They don't have a voice yet. Some of them don't have the ability to tell the terror that they suffered. Some of the things I wrote about, my wife said, you can't put that in the book. Some people will say that's crazy, that couldn't happen in America. And other stuff was so painful and so raw that it would permanently damage anybody that read it. You'd never be able to unread it. I laugh now because we have won. We have won. This Christmas, as Sharon and I spent it alone on our empty farm, which is sort of a ridiculous term since we have no farm equipment anymore. There are no animals there except the wild ones that walk through. We talked about the salvation and the wonder and the grace of a loving God who pulled us through. I have met our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, and you can meet him too. I'm nobody's spokesperson, but I will tell you that even as the media spews the twaddle of how January 6th is a stain on the history of our country, the real stain is the fact that the Constitution could be shredded and that people's constitutional rights, civil rights, and human rights could be trampled upon with such glee by the Biden administration. Many of the miscreants who did this are still lurking in the shadows. I said at the beginning, I'm not really used to talking on camera, talking with you as I am now. But I will close by saying, I really hope that we never lose sight of the principles that we've lived by in this country. The Constitution is not something to be rewritten and modernized, as some have called for. The deep state and the counter state are real, and they are bipartisan. And we need to be involved, and we need to stay in prayer, because the kind of things that happened to me and my Sharon and to so many of our other citizens will happen again if we do nothing. And now, if I may, I'll paraphrase a statement from the great General MacArthur, who at the end of his public life said, this old soldier, well, he's just going to fade away. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Blaine Eiler. Thank you to Cynthia, Doug, John, Colonel Manis and all the others involved with the Weaponization Watch and the incredible work that's being done here. I've gone through one of the toughest times of my life over the past 5 years, nearly 5 years. But my story's not all that unique, as I've found. While the events of my case might be unique to me, what I found in hearing the stories of others is that the pattern is all too familiar. I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a father, a husband from Dallas, Texas. I was indicted in the Eastern District of New York under an alleged bribery scheme involving some business partners of mine. At worst, this amounted to potentially a conflict of interest, which, by the way, is not a federal crime. And in order to even believe that we had a conflict of interest, you had to ignore really, really important elements of timing of intent. I had two partners in a main business that we had formed for the purpose of serving better food to kids, usually in schools. In parallel, one of my partners, Michael, knew Eric, who was responsible for the purchasing of food as well as transportation and athletics in the New York City public school system. Eric and Michael knew each other from their days at a prior company where Michael worked, one of the largest food companies. Eric was appointed by a Republican mayor to bring innovation and change to the city, better food for kids. And this disrupted a lot of the status quo with the bureaucrats in the city that didn't like this approach that Eric was taking. So Eric was looking to leave that position and move back to the private sector. He and Michael joined forces and spoke about a beef import company that they wanted to start. And they brought my partner Brian and me in, and we talked about forming a business to do that. Separately and in parallel, Michael, Brian, and I formed a different business that I mentioned, which was established to manufacture better food for kids. And we all know that the food in schools is not great, and it was our mission to improve that. About a year into this process, our business selling food to schools was growing, but we had spent a lot of time and money with this separate beef company to try and get beef imported into the country, and it just wasn't working. And so we decided to separate from that business. Of course, that business had expenses and things that it spent money on to grow the business. At issue in total in this case was about $96,000. Of that, about 80% were actual legal fees, and the rest were travel expenses that the business incurred to pursue this beef import business. Now, you know, the government said that initially that this was a sham company. Ultimately, they conceded, as they had to, that no, it was a real business. We were actually trying to get the business off the ground, yet they construed the entire business as a quid pro quo or a conspiracy to bribe the school official Eric in exchange for favorable things that happened to our other business that was completely unrelated, and in many cases Eric had absolutely nothing to do with. After a 4-week trial that you see permeating all these other cases, the judge did actually express serious doubt in our case. He didn't believe that, he was actually led to believe that the government was going to present a case where a bunch of callous businessmen paid off a school official to serve inferior school food to kids in schools. And that just didn't happen. Now, of course, there was an issue with some of our food, and the government focused on this in the trial. They spent a lot of time talking about some food safety issues with our chicken products, namely that they had bones in them. And of course, they did. However, they were manufactured for us by a third party, and as soon as we had any idea that there was an issue with these products, we instructed the schools to not serve them. We did exactly what we should have done to make sure that no kids were harmed. Nonetheless, the government portrayed us as callous businessmen, as I said, who would prefer to bribe a school official in order to put inferior school products in schools for kids. And so our case is on appeal now. We're very fortunate to be out on appeal and continue to fight this fight. We feel very good about it. And we raise a few issues in the appeal, which we think are very compelling. Of course, we didn't bribe anybody to get food into schools, nor Did we bribe them to put product back into schools after they had been held after the bones? And there's some major timing issues that you really have to ignore hard truths in order to believe the government's theory. And secondly, we talk about how the government showed numerous food safety issues, pictures of bloody bones and things that had nothing to do with the actual case. And of course, if you're a parent, right, a typical juror in Brooklyn is probably a parent of somebody in school in New York City or who themselves went to school in New York City. And we're fighting on those grounds as well. And so I'm proud to be part of this group. It's been great to get to know everyone here. I really appreciate all the work that everyone's doing. We're hopeful for our appeal and look forward to seeing it play out.
Hello, my name is Thomas Ranieri, and I'm an attorney. I am a civil attorney, civil litigator, and I represent some J6 plaintiffs in their suit against the United States government for violation of their constitutional rights, resulting from their wrongful arrest and imprisonment in the aftermath of the January 6th insurrection, or however you would like to put it. We are bringing a suit which is sounded in a Bivens action, which is in essence a federal cause of action which allows people to sue government agents for actions that violate their constitutional rights while acting under the color of law. By which I mean, while pretending to be, say for instance, an FBI agent or a federal prosecutor, they're actually engaging as a private tort, violating the constitutional rights, and in this case, the constitutional rights of my clients. In this particular case, the prosecutors, the Justice Department, not only used spurious legal theories which explode the concept of things like conspiracy by making my clients responsible for third-party actions that occurred on January 6th. In essence, meaning that because other people did things wrong on January 6th, they imputed those things wrong that they did to my clients, despite not having any control or communications with the people who did anything wrong. Using these theories, they put my clients in jail. They put them in pre-conviction solitary confinement, meaning, excuse me, meaning that my clients were put into solitary confinement despite not having any violent tendencies before they were even convicted of their crime. And that is the least of the problems. They also embedded confidential informants in among the trial team for the defense and tapped privileged communications between my clients and their attorneys. And these things were sent back to the prosecutorial team, which in essence gave them a leg up over my clients' ability to defend themselves. Instead of going through the laundry list, and there is a laundry list of things that the government did wrong, suffice it to say that the complaint is in the public record and anyone may look it up. But the fact of the matter is that these things normally go unaddressed. Constitutional rights violations, as you've heard a lot today, wrongful actions by both enforcement officers as well as prosecutors, abuse of process, and the manipulation of the legal system in order to achieve positive benefits, perceived positive benefits for the prosecution and the government, despite those things being manifestly against both due process and the concept of justice itself. Now, I could go on and on about this, and I would like to, but I'm running out of time already. And so what I'd like to do is just point out the fact that it's not merely that these people are put in jail when they oughtn't be put in jail, or put through the terrible experience of being prosecuted and going through year-long criminal prosecutions. But despite the pardons and the commutations that President Trump gave, their lives are ruined. They can't make money. They can't provide for their families. They're, not only do they lose years of their lives, but they can't even build their lives back up because their entire existences have been defamed and destroyed by the government. When you do that, in the normal course of life, if an individual does that, you are expected to pay restitution for the destruction of someone's life. If you make it so they can't work because you've hurt them, or you've injured them, or you've broken a contract with them, you're expected to pay them back for that violation. And in this instance, the United States government took away my clients' lives, not just a few years, their entire lives. They cannot make money, they can't get jobs. Everyone thinks that they're these evil insurrectionists. And so now they're in a situation where they're isolated, socially isolated. They can't even have normal social interactions with people because they're frightened. There are radicals out there, radical leftists out there who want to hurt them, who will threaten them despite their being commuted, despite them being pardoned. So first, I'd like to say two things. First, the United States government, not just for my clients, but for all the wrongfully accused January 6 people, should be paid, the January 6 people should be paid restitution for the damage done to them by the overzealous prosecutors and FBI that were working underneath the Biden Department of Justice, and their obvious political of people they disagreed with, which is unacceptable in a Republican form of government. We should be allowed to disagree, and if you have power, you should exercise it responsibly so that you are not hurting people just because you disagree with their position. And the second thing is, and I will end with this, that the commutations are a great start, and everyone is very grateful to President Trump for commuting sentences. But a lot of the people that were prosecuted by the Department of Justice were wrongfully prosecuted, as it says in the pardon and commutation order that he signed upon his inauguration. And the fact is that these people should all be given pardons because that pardon helps their case against the United States government to get the restitution that they deserve as a result of the violation of their constitutional rights. I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to me. I want to thank you for taking the time to watch this stream. And I want to say thank you to Cynthia for having me. And I hope that you have a wonderful afternoon.
Good evening. I'm Rob Manus, a retired colonel from the United States Air Force. Served for over 32 years in my enlisted and officer career, and have commanded at 3 levels, at least twice in combat. And I'm very proud to be part of the Weaponization Watch team that's being led up by the Patriot Freedom Project, Cynthia Hughes and John Schlafly of Eagle Forum. I'm here because there is a weaponization aspect to the Department of War's institutions. And it goes back to what we've seen with the treatment of folks from the unlawful COVID vaccine order, and that 8,000 plus individuals that were forced out of the military because they had either a religious exemption that they wanted to get past, a decision based on their religion, or a medical decision because it was an emergency use authorization medication that's not supposed to be allowed to be forced on anybody, let alone our military individuals. Well, that weaponization, believe it or not, folks, continues. I want to brief you up real quickly on the case of Brigadier General Chris Sage. I interviewed him on my show on December 29th because he was forced to retire, even though he had been promoted to Major General, the 2nd star level, but had been removed from the list by the Biden auto pen system. He was forced to retire on the 31st of December 2025 and is now out of the Air Force. But it was because 4 years ago, he made good decisions as a commander in combat in Iraq to take care of his people, but they were in opposition to the standard and somewhat wacky COVID policies, like having to wear a mask out on the flight line in the desert heat under airplanes that have engines running, and you can literally see the heat coming off of the aircraft. That was just dumb for that policy, and General Sage removed that policy when he took command of that unit. Folks that had tested positive for COVID were put in a tent surrounded by the same type of razor wire that you see at maximum security prisons. And when he saw that, he gave an order to remove that razor wire and went in and visited with those folks that had tested positive for COVID, because every human being should be treated humanely. And it was inhumane to treat these folks as prisoners, and that's exactly what he told his people. But the Inspector General system was weaponized against Chris back in those days, and he got an Inspector General complaint, series of complaints against him that had to be investigated. And unfortunately, the political appointees and the investigator, who never even came to the site where these incidents occurred, did his entire investigation from his computer in the Pentagon, even though General Sage was stationed overseas, substantiated these claims when they shouldn't have. Well, the President and Secretary Hegseth directed that the department give reinstatement opportunities for folks that were affected by the unlawful COVID vaccine order, and General Sage applied to the Air Force Board of Military Records Correction, the BCMR, and the board actually agreed with him that the IG complaint investigation was wrongly substantiated, and there really were no facts that supported it, so they overturned it. They also said that he should get his 2nd star back that he had made, that, remember, the Biden auto pin had removed him from the list so he couldn't pin it on. That's what drove his forced retirement. But here's the kicker, folks. There are thousands of younger and more junior men and women that have been adversely affected by these policies and this type of activity beyond General Sage, and he's just the symbol. He's the face of it because of his rank and his status. We need to make sure we're keeping those kinds of people or getting them back in the service, and here's why. Because they're the ones that demonstrated what's called moral courage. The courage of their convictions. When they knew that something was wrong, they stood up and they did the right thing and they made the right decision. Especially somebody like a commander in combat, making the right decision to take care of his people so that they could get their mission completed and go out and find and kill America's enemies, as we asked them to do on our behalf. That's the kind of men and women we want in charge of our military. So the Inspector General system is still being weaponized, and we need to get a Trump-appointed Inspector General in the Department of War and staff there so that we can fix that. The second thing that's going on, I just want to spend a couple minutes about it, is that the largest change in the Uniform Code of Military Justice was made in 2022, and it took the commanders, the unit commanders, out of the loop of the decision process on charging and those kinds of things for major crimes like rape, sexual assault, murder. And unfortunately, that is the most vast change that we've ever seen, but it gives the corporal's veto, so to speak, to somebody junior if they say, well, so-and-so touched me inappropriately with an unsubstantiated allegation, but that reform, taking the commanders that are the non-lawyers out of the system that make those kinds of decisions, stands in opposition to the lawyers, which we've already seen a lot of the military lawyers fired by Secretary Hegseth, and vice versa. A senior person could do the same thing to a junior person in that type of reform, and unfortunately it's already in place. So I'm calling on the Secretary of War to, sir, we've got to do a review of the UCMJ system to make sure that those folks that are operating in that system are doing it appropriately and ethically, because we have this challenge where commanders have been removed from this process, and we need to get them put back in place, because that's what's best for good order and discipline, and that's what military law, the Uniform Code of Military Justice, is all about. You can't have the lawyers be able to make all the decisions, because the lawyers' objectives, by and large, may be different than the commander's objectives. The attorneys, the prosecutors, they want to win, but the commander may have a person that he or she has the ability to save that person so they can have a productive and long career serving our country and accomplishing the missions that we give them, instead of being convicted unnecessarily, and in a lot of cases with very, very little to no evidence, just because of the system reforms that have been put in place since 2022. That's about where we're at from a weaponization perspective of the institutions in the Department of War. And I'll leave you with this. The COVID vaccine is much more damaging than the American people realize. Over 95% of America's armed forces took the COVID vaccine, and the physical adverse reactions still haven't been fully discovered, and they're not being fully acknowledged either in the Department of War or the Department of Veterans Affairs, and we need to address that issue. Thank you very much.
Well, as we say, that's a wrap, right? We thank you for tuning in. We thank our panelists. We hope that you learned a lot today. We hope that you continue to support the mission of Patriot Freedom Project and Weaponization Watch. Please follow myself, Cynthia Hughes, at RealPFP on X. Please follow Doug Mackey. Please follow Colonel Rob Manis. And stay tuned for future events coming up. We have a lot on the horizon. We have a lot of work we're working on, a lot of cases to blow the lid off of, and many J6ers who still continue to need help. We're still supporting a lot of these families. We're still helping these children. We're still helping these families, come back from the brink of near devastation. And we can't do it without you. We couldn't do it without you all this time. And so we really hope that you'll continue to support our efforts, pay attention to what we're doing, and support what's going to be happening in the future here. Learn more about the cases out of EDNY that we're working on, how we're helping and supporting Colonel Manis, with the weaponization that goes on in the military. And just pray for everybody. Pray for everybody who is facing weaponization, who is struggling. We have a lot of families that we're helping out of the EDNY that are just beginning the process of what can only be described as a nightmare. And they need prayer. And so to all you prayer warriors, please pray for these families. And we do have a message, I don't think it was echoed enough throughout the day today. 1 year ago on January 20th, we watched our president, the greatest president in American history, President Donald Trump, historically sign a mass pardon and let these people, more than 500 people that were languishing behind bars, people that were still sitting in pretrial, that hadn't gone to trial, people that were sentenced to an egregious amount of time for nothing. And we're just so grateful to you, President Trump, for restoring families, bringing families back together, putting families, back intact. But there's more to do, sir, and we hope that you're paying attention, and we hope that you will continue to speak out against weaponization and help us speak out against weaponization. And we support you, President Trump, and we always will. You're a loyal president, and in turn, we are loyal to you. And we need your help, though. We really need your help to focus on the EDNY and the SDNY. So please, if you're watching and you're hearing this, get us a special prosecutor, and let's take down EDNY once and for all and expose the corruption that is so deeply rooted there. These families need your support, President Trump. Please, I hope you hear this plea. So with that, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for supporting, and we'll see you again very soon.